I'm drinking winter punch tea from Germany. Very nice.
Nice.
It's very nice.
Out of the Killian University mug.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
The
See,
glaze is going on the mug. I noticed today.
no,
I know.
that's a bit of a disappointment. I mean, to be fair, I've just had a Podstar martini. So,
Oh, very
you
nice.
know, it's a Thursday night. Why not?
I think we need to do another trip down to Newport to get ourselves some fresh mugs.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's an excuse, isn't it?
There we go. Right. Hello and welcome to Almost in Focus episode number 5. We actually know where we are now. This is the episode number 5. I'm Tom Warland and I am joined as ever by my good friend.
Toby Beach World, the
There we are.
northern half
That
of our
was
planet.
your cue. Well done.
Got it.
Toby, how you doing? What have you been up to this week?
So I had a bit of a ramble about cameras and was going to get rid of all of my gear that wasn't modern and sensible. So for the chop were a few rangefinders and some Zenits and Practicas, things that I've ended up through charity shops or people just donating cameras to me. And I decided that they're going to go, they're going to go. And then I had a moment of weakness and took my Zorky 4, which is not even the 4K. It's the 4. So it's if somebody took a Leica and went, let's make it as utilitarian as possible and forget about lever winds and forget about refinement. Let's just have a rangefinder with a lens you can change. And it's kind of a love-hate relationship with that camera because when it works, you're so happy because you've pulled something out of nothing. When it destroys half a roll of film because the shutter's not designed for the cold, for example, this week, that's kind of more frustrating.
So
So yeah, I
Soviet
le
cameras cannot cope with a British cold weather.
yeah, so it turns out it was -2 when I was out with the camera. And halfway through a roll of FP4, frustratingly expensive film, really. The shutter speed's all jammed up. And I was like, well, I haven't moved the exposure speed up. I haven't done anything wrong with it because I know that's how you kill Soviet cameras. So I took it to not quite north, and I was like, oh, it's. I think it's dead, but it's not worth repairing. Anyway, quick chat with Ross there, who's very knowledgeable. Told me that basically Russian cameras were not made for the cold unless you requested it at factory, because the cheap grease and things they used tended to seize up, especially with age, in the cold weather. So Soviet cameras, not cold weatherproof. He kindly did strip it down and give it a weatherproofing coat. So maybe that Zorky will live to fight another day. And realistically, what ended up happening? I've not sold anything, and I've decided that old camera gear is still a sad, sad passion of mine, and I will continue to try and get super quality pictures out of total rubbish. But it's fun and it made me happy going out and playing with a camera. And sometimes that's all we can hope for. Not every picture's got to be world changing. It can just be enjoyable to go out with a camera. So I guess my takeaway from that is go buy yourself a cheap Russian rangefinder and take some pictures, people. Just expect to be wildly frustrated 95% of the time. What about you? What's your week look like?
Well, I'm not really able to do much because I've still got a broken hand. If you don't know about that, then have listened to last episode, so episode 4, where we talk about disabilities and Toby's projects looking at his long-term illness. I've been testing out some stuff actually though. So I've been doing bits and pieces with Dave, who runs Alfie Cameras for the last few years. I supported the initial Kickstarter for this camera. So this is a little half frame 35mm camera with a rotating barrel lens setup with 4 different lens options. And he's developed a hot shoe unit which clips on to its charging port on the side. So I've been testing that out a little bit over the last week with a old Sunpack SP170 flash. There we go. I know. I've had that since uni, I
Quality,
think. Is it? Oh,
quality gear that.
it's Sunpack. You know, they were great little flash guns at their time. So yeah, I need to get the film processed at Analog Wonderland still. So I'll get it to them in the next week or so. Only other thing is I took my students to the Victorian Albert Museum this week, and I saw a really lovely exhibition of photography of America. So this was called Photographing America, or America in Photographs, can't remember which. And it's based on a title of a Walker Evans book. And it was like a modern interpretation of what photographing America means. And there's some really amazing stuff. There was an artist who did drawings on a Commodore computer in the 1980s and then got them exposed onto Polaroids and then presented them as the American flag. It was really, really cool. There was beautiful prints by Henri Cartier-Bresson, Robert Frank, Walker Evans, Lewis Hine, Gary Winograd, Lee Freelander. How these photographs have been represented in album artwork. So as a record collector, that was really fun for me as well. And yeah, it was really, really great show. And my great takeaway of that was there is the steerage by Alfred Stieglitz. It's a beautiful
Oh, yeah.
photograph. And it's the first time I've seen a print of it, and the print that the V&A have, I got up nice and close. You can see his fingerprint on the negative. I know,
Shame.
I know.
Shame.
So I like, this suddenly makes me a better photographer than one of the great masters. Of course, it doesn't, but that was my little smirk as I walked along the gallery wall. So yeah,
Well, those names do kind of join nicely to what we did this week. Well, yesterday.
you see what I did there, don't you?
I did, yeah. We are smooth. So smooth. So this week we had the honor, and I think honor is the phrase, to interview one of Britain's, I would say, most well-known documentary photographers, certainly on British topics this week, and
Yeah,
they talked about, yeah, I would say so, and they talked about their influences, and funnily enough, a great deal of their influences are on at the V&A now. So might I suggest people listen to our podcast, listen to the great Homer Sykes. Yes, name drop. That's who we've got, and then go and have a look at the work that inspired that very man. I think that was. I think I covered it there.
I think you did. It was, yeah, it was a real great opportunity to have a chat with him. So we've spoken with him via his social media on and off for the last couple of years. But this was the first chance either one of us have had to actually have a proper conversation with him. And I've loved it yesterday. He was so enthusiastic to share his experiences and his knowledge for this podcast. And I found him a great storyteller. And both of us, I'm sure, Toby, I think you agree with me. We say this about Joel Mayovitz, and we've watched interviews with him giving lectures or seminars, and how engaging he is to listen to. Homer Sykes reminded me of that in this interview, in the way he was going over the stories behind his decisions on his subject matter and his approach to developing long-term projects and the travel backwards and forwards in them as well. Yeah. So
Yeah,
we'll stop rambling for a change, and
yeah.
just to shake up our usual process, this is the end of us talking. This is us saying goodbye, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next episode. But please enjoy the fantastic Homer Sykes. So this week we are joined by one of my favorite photographers. This is a real honor for me. We have Homer Sykes with us. So I first learned about your work when I was doing my masters, and it was sort of directed towards me with the idea of photographing traditions. And this weekend, so we're recording this on Wednesday, but this will be coming out on Friday the 5th of December. Saturday the 6th of December is St. Nicholas Day. So this is something that we don't really do much of in the UK, but it's become quite a big part of my life. And that's why we went with this idea of this theme. So Homer, welcome. Thank you for agreeing to join us in this little chaotic half hour or so. I'd just like to ask, what prompted you or interested you to start the project once a year?
I was at college, and this is 1967, I guess. And I went to college in London, the LCP, in 1967. And the first Easter holiday project was to go and take some photographs. It was literally, you can do what you want. It was just about getting students to go and do something. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wasn't at all sure, but I spent an awful lot of time sitting in the library looking at magazines and seeing credits and seeing how they were used. And I came across a picture of the bake-up coconut dancers in some sort of travel magazine. And lo and behold, it took place at Easter. And it looked fantastic and looked really interesting. And it was a completely mind-blowing experience for me to see that. So I thought I will go. I had never, in quote, been up north. I was a Birmingham boy, but I'd spent most of my kind of years up until that point at various schools in Somerset and in the West Country. And so the opportunity to go to the north of England, to Lancashire certainly, cropped up that Easter, and off I went. And I was very interested in colour at that point because I was always have been interested in stock photography. And I thought it would make some good colour pictures and I'd be able to sell them to clients, though I had no clients. And I was a first-year college student. And I got there and it sort of blew my mind. It was amazing. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And I thought, I'm going to do more of these sorts of things. Because I met somebody up there, a guy called Dave Bland, and he talked to me about this stuff. And I thought, this would make a great project. So that's how I got started, all in colour, 1968. And I still have some of those colour transparencies.
It's been quite early for colour stuff, really, then, when you think about it.
Yeah, it was quite early, I guess. I as I say, I started in colour, and most people were, well, we were being encouraged to shoot colour at college, and the book, as you know, once a year, some traditional British country customs, is all in black and white. And how I transferred from colour to black and white took a couple of years. In the summer holidays I was very enamored by Cartier-Bresson, Robert Frank, Gary Winograd, Lee Freelander, and co., all those American and French street photographers. But I was particularly at that point in my life enamored by Gary Winograd, Lee Freelander, Burkhauser, basically, and Robert Frank, of course. And I decided I'd go to America for summer holidays. I managed to get myself a job as a janitor in Princeton, New Jersey, and forget color at this point. I was going to go and do a mini Robert Frank. And the first or second weekend I was there, I went up to the Museum of Modern Art, and there was a show on, I don't know, it was those people. It was Burkhauser, Bruce Davison, Gary Winograd, Lee Freelander, Cartier-Bresson, and co. And their very famous photographs were hanging on the walls of the Museum of Modern Art. And I walked into this gallery, and I was just completely amazed. I had never seen photography as art hanging in a gallery. And I was there to do my little mini Robert Frank in black and white. And I suddenly realized, I remember it incredibly clearly, looking at, I think it was a picture by Bruce Davison of a young boy in Greece running down a sort of a slope. And I thought, I should be doing my country customs, not in color. I want them to be art. I'm going to do them in black and white. And I kind of wanted to go back to England then and there and start photographing all this stuff in black and white. But of course, I literally only just started my trip to America that lasted 3 months. And in that 3 months, I started on a book project called On the Road Again, which was a sort of a mini street photography trip around America. And it took 3 trips to complete. So after that, and when I did get back to England, I then pursued everything with much more vigor, I suppose. It took a little bit of time, but still with much more vigor, and shot kind of exclusively in black and white, and went back to those few customs I'd originally shot in color, and I reshot them in black and white. So the pictures of the bake-up coconut dancers that people kind of know, I think, or are reasonably well known, that was a second trip, and again, it blew my mind. So that's how I got started. And of course, I also thought, nobody else is doing this. I was obviously interested in documentary photography. I had decided that's what I wanted to do. By this time, I had met David Hearn and Bill Jay and Ian Berry, and I was shortly to meet Joseph Kadelka, and it was all black and white, black and white, black and white. And I thought that's what I'm going to do, get all this color. There you are. That's how I got started.
Well, I was going to say, having been doing my research today, actually saw about you being one of essentially David Hearn's first students, with you saying that you used to take all your prints down to show him when you were living around the corner, as it were.
Yes,
I think it was.
Yeah.
As I say, it's something that both obviously me and Tom, our training was on the Newport David Hearn course, and so it's kind of interesting to see that there's sort of continued heritage from his input in that kind of photographing things that interest you rather than just going and making the images, like going back, revisiting these things, photographing what you.
Yeah, yes, that's right. I mean, he was absolutely instrumental in my whole early development as a photographer. Literally, he used to come in he had a job share with Bill Jay, who ran a magazine called Creative Camera, and then Album, or Camera Owner, Creative Camera, and an Album, which was sort of a sort of Bible for young and photographers who wanted to do more than just this kind of pack shot studio photography. They saw it as sort of as art, as against just a commercial practice. And they had a job share, and I got to know them quite well. I lived down the road, as you say, from David. I spent an awful lot of time hanging around there, and I remember very clearly. I used to spend hours doing absolute sweet F4, sitting, and they'd think, "Oh bloody hell, it's not him again." I'm quite sure. I would just be sitting there, kind of listening and watching. And I remember clearly when he talked to me. First of all, he was very excited, and that he was going to go to kind of live in Wales and start a school of photography down in Wales. Because at that point, or up to that point, I don't know if he talks about this very much, but he had been intending to buy a house in Essex and work out of Essex. But this Welsh thing, was obviously he'd been sort of nurturing, actually cropped up, and off he went, I guess, a few years later. But I like to think that I was probably one of his sort of first kind of more serious students. I mean, obviously he was teaching a gaggle of us at college, but I kind of, I was there. I used to take contact sheets around to him and show him stuff, and he would just talk to me about making interesting pictures and how to do it.
Yeah, I think it's. I think you find there are teachers or photographers who influence you in that way quite often. I think you'll be the same, Tom. You find someone who you can talk about work with, and they inspire you and encourage you to make more or better, improve. I think that's got to be the aim for every photographer, isn't it? Is to find that other member of the community or members of the community you can bounce ideas off and grow with.
Yes, I'm sure that's absolutely right. I mean, it's right in any sort of profession. We all have mentors, one way or the other, who we look up to, work we like, or we like their business practice, or we like this, or we like that. And you learn that. I mean, I had a very, when I came to London, I'd been at boarding school since the age of 7, and I lived a very sort of middle class, albeit quite a difficult middle class kind of a life. So getting to London and seeing the big wide world for the first time, having kind of spent from the age of 7 to 18 in a boarding school, I was suddenly amazed at all the things that I was seeing and experiencing. And I suppose actually, I always think of that as being quite a major thing for me. I remember going around London, sitting on the top deck of a London bus and just being completely amazed. But I'm sure there are plenty of people who have, lived at home all of their lives and got to London and were just as equally amazed. But it was a point when I suddenly found what I wanted to do very quickly at college. And in that respect, I was lucky, I guess. I had originally thought, when I was sitting in the sixth form common room, I was looking at the newspapers and magazines, and and thinking I wanted to be a fashion photographer, and because you got the girls. And then I thought about being, an advertising photographer because you made lots of money. And then I kind of discovered there was something called documentary photography and the color supplements that we all think nothing about today. But in the mid 60s, early 60s, mainly mid 60s, 70s, they were just coming out. These were color magazines that were very much part of Sunday and sometimes Saturday newspapers, and they employed photography and photographers. And I thought, that's going to be what I want to do. And that's what I tried to do.
So did you start out, was it college was the first place you started making photos, or did you do that, where you introduced it as a early age, or out of curiosity?
I photographed at school. I had my own darkroom at school. I had my own, which I took home to my family home during the holidays. And I was just a keen amateur photographer. I used to hitch a ride into Bristol, and you could hitch in those days, and just wander around the streets taking photographs and kind of learning how all that kind of worked. And I still have many of those pictures. And I sort of experimented. I had my own darkroom. The school darkroom was in a shed at the bottom of the gardens, and it was damp and dirty. And eventually the art master said I could use the very big under the eaves space in the art school. There's no running water, but you can do without running water if you've got some in the kind of paint washing, brush and paint washing kind of area. So I'd go up there in the evenings and do rayographs and just play around in the darkroom, as all students of photography do, or very many, all students of photography do at some point or other. And I kind of learned then. The very first picture I took, a sort of real picture I think I took, was I went on a grape picking expedition to the south of France with two friends one summer holidays. And we never actually picked any grapes, basically, till we were camped. The idea was we were going to go and pick grapes and make money. Anyhow, there was the World Cup football going on while we were there. England v, I think, Hamburg. I'm not a football fan particularly, but this was 1965. And while they were sitting in a cafe watching the football in, I don't know where the hell it was now, I can't remember, somewhere in the south of France. It's on my website anyhow. I was wandering the back streets of Naples. I was in France, not in Italy. Anyhow, I was in the south of France. I was wandering around the back streets, just trying to see life, just trying to sort of find out what I wanted to do and make pictures. And I made a really lovely picture of a lady at an enormous, great concrete washing tub in some sort of back alley. And it really works well. And that, I think, 1965 was the first picture I took, basically. And then the headmaster, very end of my time at school, they put on the school play. And I was the official photographer for the school play. And I photographed the rehearsals and all of that stuff, and made little 5x4-inch prints, I guess, which I still have, of everybody. And all of those, I look at them even today or recently, they're very good. Everything was sharp, beautiful expressions, really, really well printed, if I may say so. I had everybody doing exactly what I was meant to do. So I had a very good sort of start. And then I went to the LCP and I just kept on going, basically.
Is the darkroom something you still enjoy?
I haven't been in a darkroom for a very long time. I spend probably far too much time in a light room looking at the computer. No, to answer that question, old-style darkrooms, no, not really. I haven't printed anything myself in an old-style darkroom for 40 years. I don't have a darkroom. I had a darkroom in the family home when I lived home with my family. But that was my office. So, it became a darkroom at night. And I printed stock pictures to send out to agents, because I sort of always made a living as a sort of a magazine photographer. And I used to shoot so news features and supply newspapers and agencies. So I'd make kind of 5 prints of this, 5 prints of that, 5 prints of the other. They'd all hang up overnight. They'd be dry in the morning, and I'd put them in an envelope and send them to agents, and hopefully they would license them. And that's how we all awful lot of us did it in those days. And then, of course, I kind of, at the same time, I was going down to, I was using a dark room. When I was matey with David Hearn, and I still am, and when I left college, I sort of asked him if I could borrow his darkroom, and Joseph Kudelka was sleeping in it at the time because he'd sort of got himself there. And David said, no, I couldn't, and quite correctly so as well, and sent me off to a darkroom called Grove Hardy in Waterloo. And Grove Hardy was owned by Bert Hardy and Jerry Grove. And Jerry Grove had been Bert Hardy's printer at Picture Post. And when they both left and the magazine folded, they set up a small darkroom. So I used to go down there and get all my contact sheets done and films processed. And I used them for very, very many years. And that's how, in a way, I knew Bert, and that's how I have the photographs on the wall behind me. We also did a book together at the same time, published by Gordon Fraser, which was called Once a Year, Some Traditional British Country Customs. And so when he knew I was doing that and he was doing his monograph with Gordon Fraser, we became friends, and he gave me some prints, then invited me down to his home one weekend with my two sons. And there we are. And then he became, and that whole Picture Post thing became kind of more important to me than the Gary Winograds, the Lee Freelanders, the Burke Uzzells, the Robert Franks of the world, who weren't really, and people won't like me saying this, they weren't storytelling photographers in the sense that Picture Post photographers were. Their method of shooting very often, and certainly the pictures I loved and liked of theirs, and I loved them enormously still, were very free, were street photography. That the point seemed to be nearly always that they were beautifully put together and were somehow magical. And I kind of realized that if I wanted to be a magazine photographer, I would have to actually really think about the content rather than the kind of the magic that might occur to you and somebody else, but to an awful lot of other people that say, what is this all about? So I became quite content-led, but still with a sort of a street style attitude, I would like to think. And as a magazine photographer, you need to be content-led. And as somebody who sells stock, and I've always enjoyed selling and licensing stock, you need to be content-led. And that's just the way I went. To go back to these country customs, these annual events that I've been photographing really all of my working life, though I don't do very much these days. Certainly for 50 years. I always saw it as a way of telling a story about something that was going on. And in the 70s, when I was photographing them in black and white, I really thought that I was seeing the end of an era, and that many, many, many would die out over the coming years. And at the same time, of course, I had no idea for one moment I'd still be talking about these things over 50 years later. But there you are, I am. So I was trying to record and document what was going on with these little local events. And that's what I wanted to do, basically. That was my main focus, and in black and white. And then once the book came out, and it didn't do very well at all. Once the book came out, basically, I then sort of started shooting some of them again in color. But by which time I was a very busy magazine photographer. And so it didn't really, it was a project I had done. I'd done in black and white. The book had come out. It hadn't been successful. In fact, I'm remembering now, the reason I went to lunch with Bert Hardy one Sunday lunch, come to Chartwell, that's where he lived, for lunch, was I was going to meet the publisher of my book Once a Year, who had also printed Bert's book. And he came to lunch as well. And he apparently had been trying to make contact with me for a long time. He hadn't thought, of course, to pick up the telephone directory, because there was no internet then, and just look up Homer Sykes. There's only one of us. Anyhow, He wanted to know what he should be doing with all the flat sheets, because what they did, printed all the flat sheets, and then they only bound some of the copies. And basically, they must have probably bound a couple of hundred copies, printed, let's say, 800, 1,000. So they had a big pile of these flat sheets lying on the floor in the factory. Did I want them? And no, I didn't, because they'd already been binned by the time I got down there to see him. So that was why Bert said, you must come and meet so-and-so from Western Press, who printed my book and your book, and say hello. So that's how I got down there, basically.
I love the fact that you've mentioned the names that you have, and I think you've picked up on something that I think everyone knows but doesn't really maybe take on board, which is photographers like Henri Cartier-Bresson and Robert Frank. They are great street photographers. They are artists. Their compositions are absolutely beautiful. You're right. My favorite photographer isn't among the list you mentioned, and he is very different. It's Eugene Smith, and he's in the same sense of what you were describing, in the idea of that content and that narrative and having that story through the photographs that the magazines wanted. And I think that was the real difference between the photographers like Cartier-Bresson and those who were working more predominantly with life or picture post, was that intensity or their focus towards the content of the story rather than the composition as such.
Yeah. I mean, I must say, I never thought about this quite before. I was never particularly a Eugene Smith fan. I didn't really like his pictures. And I think if I was to look again today, I don't think I would really like them. I mean, he was a great storyteller, photographer, but there's something about the way he put his pictures together that I never actually kind of was visually happy with. They seem to me to be, and I haven't looked at any Eugene Smith for quite a long time, because I have several of his books downstairs. They seem to me to be a bit forced. He seemed to be making the picture work. And I kind of don't, you have to do it if you're a magazine photographer.
Yeah.
You have to make it work. You're at the sharp end. You have to pull it together. But for me, it's one of those very subtle things. It's just like the way some writers will phrase and punctuate something in an essay or a book, and others will do it slightly differently. And I think for Eugene Smith, that it's just too kind of bump, 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 too short and sharp and too sort of predictable. That's my memory from not having looked at Eugene Smith for a while. Well, if you look at, let's say, Bruce Davidson or Burke Uzzell when they were shooting for Life magazine, they were telling the same sort of stories. They had to produce stuff that worked. Or Elliot Erwitt. Again, I've never really been a big Elliot Erwitt fan. But they had a sort of their compositions for me were a little bit looser and not quite so obvious. And I only mean looser in the way they didn't pack too much into a small rectangle. And I like that. And I like to feel that my work is content focused. And I try to make everything work kind of in 1 or 2 or 3 frames max. But I like to feel that the framing and the way you pull the people together is a little bit looser, a little bit sort of, there's more serendipity involved than in Eugene Smith, who, I don't know. Yeah. I don't,
I know what you mean.
They just don't really work for me.
Yeah. I do like that about Erwitt, and I enjoy his sense of humour.
Yeah, there's a lightness. But the word I'm thinking about actually is lightness. There's a lightness in the way that the framing is sort of massaged into place.
More of a collaboration than a forcing.
Say that again.
More of a collaboration than a force composition.
Yes.
What you're working with, which I suppose when you look at your own images, when you look at the communities and things, you have to work with these people, because you don't want to throw them off or be that annoying photographer who's turned up with a camera. You're there to observe, aren't you?
Yeah, you have to get on. Obviously, you have to make friends with these people, in a fairly quick and instant manner. But there is sort of it's just the way you put the image together. And I just never particularly liked the way Eugene Smith put his images together. I mean, I'm not a great reader of novels, but, there are some great novelists who people wax lyrically about because of the way they structure their sentences. And then you can get another great novelist who will structure pretty much the same message using very many of the same words, and it would just, for many people, not be as good. It's just a teeny little thing that makes something a bit better for some people and not quite so good for other people.
It's Bart's, isn't it? The studium and punctum. Something grabs you in an image.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I know nothing about guitar playing, but you get any number of guitarists who play the same music, the same songs, the same whatever, and some people, oh God, he plays it so beautifully. It's just that one guy or that one woman has just a slightly lighter touch or a heavier touch, whatever.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you. How are we doing for time?
Do you want me to sort of tell you about how my last book on country customs came together? Yeah, basically, as we've so far been talking about the earlier part of my career and my book, Once a Year, Some Traditional British Country Customs. And when that was published eventually in 1977, and I must say, again, it's down to David Hearn. He was the one that massaged me into shape, basically, and helped me through all that process and helped get me grants and all the rest of it. By which time, this was 1978, 77, published in 77, I was a busy photographer in London, shooting kind of street reportage and for magazines primarily, and shooting for agents. And I started shooting some of these traditional country customs in color because I still believed in color, as I had done right at the very beginning. And by now I had clients. Of course, I didn't in 1968 when I was at college. And I thought some of those pictures would be useful. And I also was very aware, I've always been very interested in the business of making money out of my photography rather than the business of making money out of for other people who want to have pictures. So I like the idea of being completely self-contained and just being able to make money and not rely on people phoning you up to give you a job, which is jolly stressful, as we all know. So I shot some of these things again in color. I went back, but only periodically. I was running around the world and shooting for everybody the whole time, very, very busy. And that really kind of carried on in that sort of vein until the late mid-90s, let's say. And everything, of course, started to change. I, of course, was very much older than many of the people I was working for in magazines. That old guy is, and he's even older now. He's still flogging his wares. And I started doing a bit of teaching. And I also was in the process of getting a divorce. And so it was lots of stress and strain and not working. And I remember sitting in my little flat that I had thinking, what the hell am I going to do? One, I wasn't working for magazines anymore. Two, I was doing a little bit of part-time teaching. And three, I was kind of looking at my archive and thinking, how can I shift more of this stuff? And the internet was beginning to get going. It wasn't going like it is today. And no doubt in 20 years' time, it won't be going like it is at the moment. And what I did was I thought, I'll do a book on hunting with hounds. So I did that and spent a year photographing that. And when that was done and dusted and came out, and it got very well reviewed, this was a book about rabbit, rat, hare, fox, mink, and stag hunting over a period of a year, which I took to Italy myself and published and took to printers and sold and sat outside countryside events, flogging it right, left, and center. I thought, no work, no money, plenty of time I had. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll go back and re-photograph all of those events I did in the 70s in color and see what's changed. So I started to do that. And pretty soon after I started, I realized that one, there were 1,000 photographers there, and two, I was just repeating myself. And I just thought, why am I repeating myself? I've seen all this stuff once. And when I did it in the 70s, I was the only person there. And this carried on, I suppose, for about a year, while I was trying to work out what and how I was going to do it, and whether I would do another book, or whether I just keep on going away at weekends and photographing these things, just basically to get out of the flat, and to do stuff. And I photographed several events again, probably for the third time. I probably did them in the 80s as well. And one evening I was driving back from Somerset. And, well, let me start from the very beginning. One evening I was driving back from Somerset in 1974. And I decided I needed to go to the loo. And I pulled off the main road and drove down a narrow lane and on and on and on. Eventually found a pub and pulled into the car park and went to the loo, basically. I was the only person in the pub. It was in the middle of nowhere. And when I came out, I started making small talk to the publican about life, really. And as I said, I was the only person there. And on the wall, there were a whole load of black and white photographs, all in little frames. And there was one of a group of men sitting around a table, and one of them had a very tall, conical hat on. And I said, "What's this?" And he said, "It's the duck feast." And I said, "The duck feast?" He said, "Yeah," and explained what happened. And I thought that would be fantastic. It'd be perfect for my book, 1977 book. And I made a mental note of the pub, a mental note of the village. And I'd had half a pint, and I got back in the car. And I remember sitting in the car, driving out the village. And I really remember this. And I'm turning around to see the name of the village on the street sign. I made a mental note of that. And then 200 yards down the road, I'd forgotten where the hell I was. And the name of the pub, and the name of the event even. It's completely gone. I was knackered. It was probably 10:30 at night. I'd been photographing all day, driving back to London. Anyhow, I never, ever forgot that event. Anyhow, in 2006 or 7, I was driving back from Somerset one evening, as I do. As per normal, it was quite late, and as per normal, I wanted to go to the loo. But this time, my sat-nav had been taking me off the main road. You know, the way sat-navs sometimes take you off the main. They think, why am I, what's going on up there? The sat-nav's taking me a new way, and I want to go to the loo. And I pulled into a pub car park. I remember driving and thinking, I'd been here before.
Wow.
I got in and I walked into the pub. And the pub, when I went in there the first time around, it had been very down at heel. And this time it was all brand spanking new, polished pine pub. I was the only person there. I said to the publican, "Can I use the loo?" He said, "At the back." So I went down the back. I was standing there and I thought, I wonder if this is the pub I'd been into 40 years earlier. And I came out and I had an orange juice and I was chatting to the publican. And I said to him, "Does anything happen here on a regular basis where a lot of farmers get together once a year and have a meal or something like that?" And he looked at me quite shocked. And it said that he'd only been in there 2 weeks, but the night before last, one of the farmers had phoned up and said, "We'll be up for the duck feast on Monday next." So I thought, aha. So I said, "What is it?" He said, "I've no idea. I've only been here 2 weeks, but they come up for a regular meal." So this time I wrote down the name of the pub, the name of the village, the farmer's name and his phone number. My half a pint of orange juice, drove home, made a phone call the next morning, and turned up 10 days later and photographed the duck feast. And the duck feast is a celebration of a man called Stephen Duck, who was almost the poet laureate in 1756, and who was a thrasher's son. And the first Lord Palmerston had given the village a plot of land, and the rent from that land. And Stephen Duck had been to the first feast, and the plot of land is rented out every year, and the rent from that land goes towards a duck feast every year to celebrate one of their own. He was a thrasher's son, left school at 14. His second wife, when his first wife died, when he was in his 20s, he decided to educate himself. And he was obviously a very clever man and wrote poetry, and he was introduced to the Queen. And highly celebrated, and she put him forward to become the poet laureate. He didn't quite make it, and very sadly, he died by suicide. Nevertheless, they celebrate his life every year. And when I photographed that, I thought, if I'm going to do more work on traditional English country customs, what I'm going to have to do is photograph stuff that nobody else has photographed, or nobody else has photographed professionally, or hardly ever. And that's not in the books, that's not online. And that started the voyage for the new book, which is called An Annual Affair, Some Traditional British Calendar Customs. And that's why it took, 10 years to put together, because I tried to find events that mainly weren't being photographed by other people. And of course, I didn't know it would be a book to start with. I had no idea. I suppose as I progressed, I hoped it might be. And it was something I was always researching, and people were telling me about odd things. And I was just going off and photographing them. And then I was having a sort of a good business relationship with Dowie Lewis Publishing. And I said to talk to him about this book, and we agreed that he would publish it. It took a bit of persuading, but we did. And I think it's been pretty successful. But again, it was really a business of trying to record stuff that doesn't happen anymore. So in the first book I did, once a year, there are probably half a dozen events that no longer take place. And there are probably 80 different events in the book, of which half a dozen now don't take place at all. And I should think about half of the balance are still kind of potter on, and the rest have become kind of quite famous. So when I photographed the Haxley Hood game in 1972 up in Lincolnshire, I was one of probably three photographers, probably two, local newspaper photographer, myself, and there was occasionally another guy who would run around like I was. It was very much an amateur photographer, would take pictures. And you go back to Haxley Hood game again, which takes place on Plough Monday, January the 5th, as I recall. There are 40, 50 photographers there. And so in this new book, I was trying to get away from all of those things and find stuff that other people weren't doing or were really pretty obscure. And that's what I did. And so, and how did I find out? Well, of course, these days I could use the internet. So I looked up a lot of stuff on the internet. I spent far too much time on the internet the whole time. People would tell me. I got a phone call, a letter one day from a lady up in Cumbria to say, she had been given a copy of my book once a year. Somebody had given it to her. And she said, "You haven't photographed our mayor's feast." I said, what's your Mayoring Sunday? Mayoring, whatever it's called. Actually, it's not in this book because it's a hunting thing. I thought it might put people off. But I went to sort of quite a few events that were completely unphotographed. And I hope all the photographs will become a sort of an historic record of what was happening in small village events in the beginning of the 21st century, just as I hope the photographs for my book once a year will become, or are becoming, or have become, a recognized document of these types of events at the back end of the 20th century.
I think they have. And I live in High Wycombe in Buckinghamshire.
Yeah.
I found out about a local event in High Wycombe from your books.
Right.
Which is our mayor weighing in ceremony, where the mayor and also now local councillors all get sat on a set of scales in the town square, which for some of them I think is probably quite embarrassing, but it's part of the local customs now. And I had no idea this thing happens, and I've seen it. I saw it last year. And
bring out your camera.
Yeah, well, I didn't have my camera. I didn't know it was on that day. I didn't know it was that.
Shame on you! Shame!
I know.
I'm embarrassed to be on this podcast with you right now. How could you not have a camera with you?
Well,
in
you
this
live in
day and
Lincolnshire. You've not
age?
been to your one.
No, this is true. I do live in Lincolnshire. Stop telling everyone that I've crossed the border further south. I'm one of the only Yorkshiremen living in Lincolnshire. We try and keep it on the down low. No, it's true. I think it's something that's innately British. These kind of events, though, aren't they? I mean, there's sort of these.
Well, I'm not so sure, really.
No,
The British ones are innately British, but if you go to Spain, gosh, think of all the things that must be happening there. You go to any of those European countries, there's all sorts of stuff going on there that we just simply don't know about, and they don't know about. Just like you, Tom, didn't know about weighing the mayor, in your hometown. I bet you go to sort of some obscure town in southern Spain, and they've got some fantastic things happening there that nobody knows about and nobody's photographed. I guarantee.
Yeah, it must be.
And hopefully they haven't changed too much with the sort of passage of time, and they're kind of still very local. One of the things that I was trying to do, one of the things I noticed in this sort of transition from the 1970s book to the 2000s book to an annual affair, was that many of the events I photographed in the 70s, and some of the ones I went back to, and certainly what I'd seen since and know, is that little local affairs I photographed in the 70s now often have become much bigger, and they're no longer local. Everybody gets involved. I mean, tourist authorities have come in and can see the possibilities of generally, all the rest of it, making it a local custom, a local event, and endless events are starting up that have no bearing on any relationship to some, historic thing in a village, or almost none. And so what I tried to do, and I think I have done in an annual affair, is photograph small events that still are really local. I mean, many, many, many of the events I went to for an annual affair just have got still only, a small contingent of people there, and they still really are relevant to the people, to the village, to the history of that village. And that, for me, is what it's really about. I was talking to a friend up in Derbyshire who got involved and became interested in traditional country customs because of my book Once a Year. We've become quite matey over the years. And he writes about folklore and photographs and works as a librarian as well. And he was ecstatic the other day. He was telling me that he was going to be able, and he had managed to arrange for a whole load of pubs up in Sheffield to have a caking night and to recreate what I had done in the 70s. And I thought, well, fine. And even a photographer from France was coming over to photograph it. I thought, that's not the point. The point for me is that it's what happens there, has always happened there, and is really traditional to that particular community. Of course, when I photographed this stuff in the 70s, it would have come and gone and changed and all the rest of it, but it still was a local event. I mean, what happens today is easier for me when I did an annual affair. Many of these events take place on the Saturday. When I was photographing this stuff in the 70s, it would be on the particular day, and it wasn't put off to the following Saturday or the Saturday before. And people would take the day off work to do their traditional country custom, where today say, no, we can't take the day off, but we can all do it on Saturday. We'll get more people coming to us. It'll be a bigger event. It'll be much more fun. We'll all be happier. That's fine. That's fine, but not fine for me.
I remember a few years ago now, it was just before COVID hit, I found out about the prospects that May Day, which had already been shifted from being the 1st of May to the first Monday of May, was potentially going to be shifted that particular year a whole week to coincide with VE Day. And there was a protest of Morris dancers on the steps of the House of Parliament.
Yeah,
which was photographically amazing, to be with 20 to 30 Morris dancers all waving sticks and hankies, and there was a green man, all this, with Parliament behind us, and a couple of MPs got quizzed by them, and the press turned up at one point as well. And obviously, COVID then hit a few months later, and the May Day wasn't moved, and all the festivals were cancelled anyway. But that was their point. It was they didn't want to lose a day which was central to the folk calendars, and all these events have been planned for years in advance to have those festival locations and big tents and stages and whatever they needed for the festivals. We're suddenly going to lose them because of shifting the bank holiday rather than adding one for the special VE celebrations. Yeah. It was the kind of thing that they were talking about then as well. You photographed so many traditions through those books, through other bits and pieces along the way. I've looked at a lot of your books, and I've got several as well.
Very much.
What has been your
Did I hear you say anything, Tobias?
I can join in. I do also own them. I was just going to say,
have you got any of my books?
Yeah, I've got copies. Don't worry. I was was talking about this. Don't mute me. I was
I'm only
sorry. I was referencing you the other day to one of my students who's doing their final major project, and I've told them they need to have a listen to our podcast to see when it goes live.
Yeah, okay, fine.
I'm sure I will regret it, but yes, I do have a copy. Yeah. Not a signed one yet.
We can sort that out very easily.
Fantastic.
It's an excuse for me to travel south.
Yeah.
You're always welcome to stay here, mate. What has been...
I've thrown you, sorry.
You have thrown. You always throw me. What has been your favourite tradition or event over the years? What's one that brought you the most joy to photograph?
Well, I think really I'm always overjoyed when I get home and I looked at the contact sheets or looked at the files online, and it's all come together, and I've got a picture that really works. I've been asked this question. There isn't an event that I go there to work. I don't go there to enjoy them. I mean, that might sound horrible. It's a business. I'm there absolutely to make pictures work. And so I don't have a favorite event. They're all favorites. When I come back, put the card reader into the computer, go through the files, and I can pick out 3 or 4 that I think work, and then 4 or 5 days later pick out some more, and I can package it up and say I've got 10 pictures, and this is the main one, and I've got this, and I've got that, and I've got 3 crackaroos. Then that's a favorite event. However, what I would say, most enjoyed photographing. I know what I did enjoy photographing. I mean, I did enjoy this. It was amazing. When I photographed an annual affair, there's this whole business of trying to find stuff that other people weren't photographing. It's quite difficult. And I came across a group of people who were oddfellows. I know what I absolutely loved. One event, which I was probably the only photographer I had that has been photographed quite a few times for other people. When I was there, I was interested. It was the Harvest Home Festival at East Brent in Somerset. Absolutely fantastic. I discovered Harvest Home Festivals. And what it is, Harvest Home Festivals take place primarily in Somerset. And it's the end of the harvest. And in the old days, in quotes, the old days, let's say 100 years ago, every farmer would give his farm workers a sort of a day off, and they'd have a big feast, and it'd be a harvest home. They'd have the day off or 2 days off because they drank too much. Then the next farm would have their 2 days off, the next farm. And so what was happening was that for maybe 10 days or 2 weeks, in and around Somerset villages, and particularly in around East Brent, nobody was doing any work. So the village vicar, bless him, and the church warden decided they would try to prevent people having their own harvest home festivals, and that East Brent would have a communal harvest home festival. And so the whole village would come together once a year at the end of the harvest, and they would have a big celebration for all of the work they'd done throughout the year, and celebration that the harvest had been brought in, and so on and so forth. And it's a big event, and no photographers, so absolutely fantastic. all absolutely local people. And I found out it. I phoned them up. They said, come down. I turned up with my girlfriend and the dog. And it's brilliant. And what's great about this Harvest Home Festival is there's a procession of Christmas puddings. So the local women, it's completely bizarre. There's a procession of Christmas pudding. So the local women at the very start of the Harvest Home Festival, and it goes on all day, at 11 o'clock-ish, they parade through the village, down the main road, into field. They all carry a Christmas pudding like this, which is amazing. They're all in their best frocks, and you've got big ones, skinny ones, all shapes and sizes, parading through the street. And then behind them is four men carry a huge cheddar cheese that's absolutely ginormous. It's this big on the great board, and then bread is carried as well. And all of this gets carried into the marquee. The ladies carrying the Christmas puddings into the marquee. Around 400 people in the marquee with these Christmas puddings. This is the end of the summer. And there's fantastic music. People drink enormous amounts. And it's a Christian event. And so there's a sort of grace is said and cider's served. And it's just a wonderful village event, but completely kind of strange with this procession of Christmas pudding. So when I got there and it all worked perfectly, it was just the best time I had. They were incredibly friendly, lots to photograph, a whole day, and it worked beautifully. And I think I'm probably, the local newspapers cover it, but it's something that's not well known. So that was a great find. And then another thing I photographed, which I absolutely loved as well, it was absolutely a fabulous day, was the Corby Pole Fair. This is one of the events in my book that doesn't take place every year, but takes place every 20 years. And I had no end of people, half a dozen people either wrote to me, emailed me, or phoned me up and said, are you going to go to the Corby Pole Fair? I said, no, what's that? You don't know. It only happens twice a year, every 20 years. And so I made myself go to the Corby Pole Fair, which meant getting up incredibly early and being there for 6 o'clock in the morning. And it celebrates Corby Old Town and Charter Fair and so on and so forth. But what they do is they chair men. Church bells are rung, small services conducted, and the vicar and the mayor, who in this case was a local black mayor in his robes, they get chaired through the village, which is fantastic. So they're sitting in a sort of a throne-like chair that are on two poles, and you've got four men on either side with the poles on their shoulders, and they carry the oldest lady in the village through the village. They carry the vicar, and they also carry the mayor. And because he was a black guy and he was being carried through, and one of the men at the front of this procession is carrying him through, and he's wearing a Union Jack T-shirt. And it's the exact opposite to what you'd see in the old colonial pictures of a white man being chaired through an Indian town or along a beach or whatever. There's lots of those photographs. This was perfect. It was a lovely day. The place went on all day. Lots of stuff happening. No traffic because the whole village was traffic free. Just a really lovely event that takes place once every 20 years. Amazing. And I came back and ready to answer your question. I thought, gosh, that was such a lovely day. And I got some great pictures, which kind of really, really helped. But it was a lovely day. Both of those two, I would go back to tomorrow if they were going on and re-photograph, just because it was good fun. I won't, of course, because I got the pictures.
Do you find having the camera gives you sort of license to go places that you maybe wouldn't be able to otherwise? It's sort of your
yeah. No, definitely, absolutely, definitely. One of the things, well, I lived in London all my working life, and I really don't like the place at all. I mean, I'm only here because that's where that's where my clients were. That's where the processing labs were. That's where I brought up my family, and that's now where I live. They all disappeared. sensible. No, because a lot of my work was in London. Also, a lot of work was out of London, in fact, all over the place. But I just like getting away and going to little villages and photographing what's going on. One of the things that both once a year and an annual affair have allowed me to do, the photographs have allowed me to sort of see people in a very relaxed mood and in a relaxed way, really paying no attention to me by and large. I'm just, another photographer or a guy who's photographing the event. And you actually sort of see life completely differently from when I was working as a magazine photographer and would have to go and make pictures work. There was a very definitely a different sort of mental dynamic involved in actually having to do it and make it work. When I'm funding these things myself, I have to do it and make it work. But there's a different kind of pressure. There's a different kind of way I want to tell the story. So yeah, getting out of London has been one of the great pleasures of doing all this work. I mean, I've been, all over the country, to obscure villages where I would never have gone to in the normal course of events. And of course, when I was being a magazine photographer, you'd go to wherever, Bedford, Birmingham, Bingley, or somewhere else. And you had to make it work, and you're in and out in a day. These things I'm in and out in a day, but I have kind of a much more interest in going because I see you just pick up things. You could talk to people in the pub and not have to race back to get the film processed that night to deliver the next morning. It's just a different process basically. And so I've been all over the country, but I've done lots of books that involve me going all over the country. So I've been very, very fortunate. Yeah. I did a book called The Village Pub, which a lot of people say, oh, that must have been great. I photographed 110 village pubs, but you try and photograph 110 village pubs on a fairly tight schedule and to have nobody in the pubs and no cars. And the brief for that was, we don't want anybody with sawn off, this is in the early 90s, sawn off jeans, no tattoos, no umbrellas outside the pubs, just plain pubs. If you can find somebody who's looks like they're a character, then that's okay. So it was, quite tricky. But I went to 110 different pubs, or probably 200 pubs, because a lot of them got knocked out of the system. So yeah, that was great fun as well. It's getting out of London, basically.
Yeah, it's escaping.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an escapist. I wish I could escape now.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of us do. That's why we have our camera, or what we do with our cameras. I know my projects are always a way of getting somewhere else or seeing something else that I maybe wouldn't have had I not got the camera
absolutely. there. Yeah. It's seeing stuff, meeting people, just seeing a slightly different way of life or a very, very different way of life, and just understanding more about society as a result. I mean, that's and the country customs. I mean, people sometimes say, you're interested in folklore. Well, I am interested, but actually I'm interested in social documentary. I'm interested in sort of, rather than, I'm not a folkie, I'm not a folklorist. I went with a very specific reason to all of these events to document what was going on. And I'm a documentary photographer. That's all there is to it. That's what I do. That's what I enjoy doing. That's what's kept me busy for years and years and years and years.
Fantastic. How are we doing for time, Tom?
Our time is fast running out on the recording. I think we'll probably call it there. I just want to say thank you while it is still recording.
Yes, I would say thank you very much.
Yeah, and listening to what you said, I really want to revisit the stuff I've been doing over the last few years with Morris dancers and going to wassail festivals and pick that project up again and see where else I can take it. You've kind of sort of re-inspired that stuff that I was doing a few years ago. So thank you for that as well.
I'm very happy that I got inspired along the way, and if I can inspire other people, that's fantastic. fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much. And something that I'm definitely going to make my students listen to. No, it's their homework. Have a listen to us lot.